It was fascinating growing up in my family, which had two realtors. They were the fourth generation in our family, and I happen to be the fifth. And there was no MLS, none whatsoever. There were no listing agreements. People went and found their listing agreements and tried to make them conform with whatever at that time were the rules and regulations. At one time, this board had 3 MLSs. Apparently, the large brokers started an MLS, whoever the large brokers were at that time. And I don't know, I honestly don't. And then the small brokers got mad and they formed one. And then for a compromise, the board had one, and so ultimately we all got together and did, the board MLS.
At that time, we had no cell phones, we had no pagers, we had no copy machines. All of our forms came from Missouri Association of Realtors, and we bought them. And so you bought your contracts, you bought your listing agreements and all that. They were in triplicate, so no e-signatures, nothing like that like we have today, okay? And so everything was handwritten primarily. We did have typewriters, believe it or not.
A typical day in real estate for me when I started out, which has been right at 50 years now, was very different. We had only 13 firms in our multiple listing system. Missouri Association of Realtors was downtown on 10th Street, and we would meet on the mezzanine of the Daniel Boone Hotel, which Daniel Boone now is our city building. And then when we started to grow, we went into their banquet room. We toured our houses on a bus, and that was really quite nice because you got to know everybody.
We had tours. We had MLS tours. We all met in a central place, each week. And we all go there and we'd hear about the new listings and all that. And then we'd get in cars. Before my time, they got in buses, but we got in cars and we ran around to look at houses. So I'm with some guys in our office. It's the first time I'd ever been on tour. And we'd been to 3 or 4 different houses, and we're coming down this street, and the people look at the listing and says, "This listing's overpriced. There's no way that this listing is going to sell. It's just flat overpriced." Well, I don't know if it's overpriced or not. I haven't been around the business, that. We pulled up across the street, and bingo, coming down the driveway is Al Brady, who's got a contract in his hand signed by his buyer for the price, okay, and says, "Too late, guys, it's already sold." I learned a huge lesson that day. Realtors don't decide what the prices are, the consumers decide what the prices are.
I got my license June 6th, 3 o'clock, 1985. It was a very unique time in our world. I was too naive to know that 18% interest rates were bad. It was an interesting time. You had to know your math or you wouldn't be able to sell any real estate.
When I started in the real estate business, a typical day would have been actually to show up at the office. We were expected to be present. We couldn't work from home as convenient as it is today. We did other things a little different. We actually held escrow money ourselves. When we wrote contracts, we prepared the closing statements ourselves. We wrote the checks for those transactions, and everything was pretty much done in-house. We were each one pretty much a self-standing company,
Well, when I first started in the Board of Realtors, the internet was not available. We had a computer system over at the board office that was hooked by telephone modem to the offices, most of the offices, and there was a machine called a whisper writer where you would do your search in the book or look at hot sheet on the whisper writer. Then you'd put in the MLS numbers you wanted to print out, and it printed out on thermal paper.
If you bought the paper in a large roll, you would tear it off. And if you kept it in the car more than a day or two, it was too faded to read.
Typical day when I began in 1983 was just like any listing and selling agent of today, except for We searched for real estate out of books. We didn't have, of course, the internet. And at the same time, my broker then, Ray Stockton, started having me do more of a brokerage role. So he was my mentor into what I actually do now.
I don't think I had a mentor as such. At that time, my broker was Mary Jane Mendenhall, and Mary Jane was a direct command person. She told you what to do and expected you to do it, and if you did that, it probably worked. And so I think there was a direct influence by someone kind of helping you by telling you, here's what you need to do, and then if you didn't do it right, they'd help you out. So, but we had an assistance, a broker assistance set up.
I was one of the 7 women that opened House of Brokers in 1981, and it was really tough at that time. We operated on a shoestring in the basement of a savings and loan at Parquet Plaza, and we had our computers. We all used that one, the 7 women. And we had one lady in our firm, Harriet Paget, which we all adored. We all got a little frustrated with it, but we had to watch her very closely so she wouldn't pick it up and slam it to the floor because she'd get so frustrated with it.
In the old days, back when we still rode the horse and buggies, when an offer was written, you would drive it to the listing agent, and you and the listing agent would go to the seller, and the agent working with the buyer would explain the buyers and their offer to the seller, and then leave the room while the seller and the seller's agents would discuss the offer. So you actually knew people. You knew your buyer, you met the seller, you met the other agent, and you worked together in person instead of just by email, which I really miss that interaction.
I don't know of another job or a career I could have had that would have been so rewarding and so satisfying and has allowed me to honor my commitments to my family and to my faith. So I'm thrilled to be part of it.
All the brokers had their own contracts and their own listing agreements. And so an agent would come into me and bring me a contract from another broker, and I had no idea if they'd changed the words or what the words, legally meant. And and sometimes that contract wouldn't say it was approved by an attorney. And we all had the rules that we had to use contracts that were approved by an attorney. And so it was just a nightmare. And so the only safety factor that I remember as a broker back then was just to put it all together on our contract. So we'd put it on our contract and submit it, and then the other broker was in the same boat, probably, and so if they made a counteroffer, it would come back, on their contract, and we'd all be tearing our hair out.
In those days, the title people did the title work, but the brokers did all of the actual closing statements. So we had to call each other and find out we had to call the county and find out the taxes. We prorated everything. And back in those days, there was no title insurance that we did. There were no inspections. It was pretty much up to the brokers. And just in the last several years, have the title companies taken over that job.
The advent of the involvement of the title companies, taking care of preparing the title insurance instead of the opinions that we used to get by lawyers, the title insurance, the fact that they prepare the closing statements, disperse the funds, makes it a much more professional and organized approach to selling somebody's home.
I sat down after being in the business for about 2 years and realized we had agents, as did the other brokers, writing all kinds of clauses on the contracts. We didn't have a clause in the contract about termite inspections. You would not believe the different way termite inspections were written. Sometimes the seller was paying, sometimes the buyer was paying, lawsuits were coming up later on and stuff like that. And so Bill McCullough and myself, we sat down and identified like 20 different clauses over 2 years of contracts that we realized we just need to get an attorney to do these for us. The state started noticing. And so several of us got involved in estate forms, and I will tell you, when the first state form came out, it was 90% Columbia's contract.
A typical Wednesday morning for anybody that was doing anything in the business was meeting at the board office for our weekly MLS meetings, 9 o'clock every Wednesday morning. And if you didn't go, you didn't know what was happening.
We had a binder, so we were the keepers of our multiple listing system. They would send them out to us, but we'd have to keep them up as far as what had sold, what was still available, what the conditions were. If there was price changes, we made it on that sheet. And then we became rather sophisticated, and we had them book bound.
You know, when I started, we had somebody who did, they called it board load, so they would load the listings into the MLS for you. So you got to fax your MLS data sheet to the MLS and wait, you know, hopefully 24 hours for your listing to be uploaded. So it was a great service, but things have just completely changed to a more, rather than just, you know, a basic data entry and that kind of stuff.
The first MLS system I was used to was a downloadable system where you downloaded it to your actual computer. As one of the staff members at the board was inputting data into the system, you'd have to go and update the data several times a day so you had the most recent information.
Everything took a lot longer, and you got to check realtor.com for your listing and update the price if it changed through there, and you got to make sure that all the other sites were accurate because it didn't just automatically do it for you back then.
One of the things that we take for granted is our MLS. In the MLS, most people, when they think of it today as electronics, which is really good. That's something I really like about it. But they don't remember way back the rules and regulations. MLS is really about rules and regulations, and that's what served the consumer the very, very best.
I think the real contribution from my standpoint that the board evolved into was the development of a very effective multiple listing system.
So when I first joined the board, you know, it was 1996. And right about that time, technology was advancing. I started as an assistant to my dad in the office, but I was learning all the title work, how to process folders, and all the intricacies of really being a real estate agent. So it was very exciting because the market was good, agents were happy, and it was a good time to start and to start a career.
Well, I think the board has changed a lot since I started in the 80s, but our particular board, it's able to give more services and provide the services to the agents of our area, and now to, you know, expanding to other areas.
Now, when we have members join, we want them to realize all the benefits they have to becoming a member of our board and all the products and services that we offer. So we really tried to keep that connection going with new members their first 6 months to a year.
It's more service-based and growing, education and RPAC and that kind of stuff. So
They're much more involved in taking political positions to protect the rights of our people.
One other thing that the board's gotten more involved with is fighting for property owners' rights at a local level. We're much more involved in some of the decision making that goes on with the city of Columbia and Boone County, and we really try to let our voice be heard.
For people that truly wanted to be involved in leadership positions and in state leadership positions, and the board stood behind them and helped them, you know, encouraged them, you know, facilitated it to the extent that they could.
Yeah, don't count the chickens before they hatch. I can say that also about don't count your closings before they're closed. Bill McCollum and I once had a transaction several years ago that we were at the closing. The lender was going over the loan documents, and all of a sudden, when he got to the APR disclosure, the wife got up and said to her husband, "I really don't like you this much." and she walked out of the room, and that didn't close. So don't count your closings till they're actually closed.
The key boxes we had, you had a little Coke machine key, and you'd put it in the key box and turn the lock and open it. If we had freezing rain or cold weather, sometimes the boxes would freeze, and you would have to take a cigarette lighter and warm your key to get it into the lock sometimes. Sometimes you'd have to take a cigarette lighter and melt the ice off the key box. And sometimes you just turn around and leave.
One of my first volunteer opportunities I was given by Paul Lant, who was president in 1998. And at the time, we still had mechanical lock boxes. I think there are still people in this board who probably have injuries from rekeying lock boxes. And for the agents who are new, they won't understand that because they probably always have experienced electronic lock boxes. But I ended up being the 5th chair in 7 years to try to convert our board to electronic lock boxes. And one of the members said, at the time I was 27, and again, technology is just coming out, the internet's coming out, and he said, if the technology is older than Elizabeth, it's worth a look to see if we would consider changing.
I had a client one time looking at new home, really, really old homes, and she just started her search, and we were looking at an old home downtown after dark, and finding light switches and so forth were difficult, but we got to the basement, and it was complete and utter darkness, and we're feeling the walls for light switches, and then we get down to the basement finally, and we're circling the ceilings to try to find pull chains, and just as I hit the light switch, she bumps into hip waders, which she thought was a dead man hanging in the basement, jumped frantically on top of me on her way to the stairs. And we were in and out of there in a hurry. When I asked her in the car if she was interested, facetiously, she said, "You couldn't give me that house."
Back in the 70s, I went out to show this old farmhouse, and there were a lot of mattresses around on the floor, and I looked out the windows and I thought, what is that green field out there? I was raised on a farm, but it didn't look like soybeans or anything to me. And I hadn't done drugs, but it smelled really sweet in that house, a little different smell. And we got a contract on it, but it burned down. I don't know how.
The future of the CBOR, we're a strong board, and we're recognized nationally for being a strong local board.
Well, I think it's probably going to grow just because some of the changes with the National Association regulations and everything. And I hope that the CBOR will be the hub for Mid-Missouri.
As we grow, membership really realizes the benefits of being part of a more regional organization and having the power of that behind them. So whether that's through legal issues or technology or just benefits of being a member, that social aspect, there's so many different ways that the Board of Realtors office helps you in your business. And so I hope that people realize that and we continue to grow.
So I was the 2018 national president, and it gave me the opportunity to go around the country and see all types of associations. We should be so proud of our staff, our committees, the position that we have for our realtors, because the future it's always dynamic, it's always changing. It's not relevant to bring back things from 20 years ago, but what is extraordinarily relevant is to figure out where we need to be 20 years from now.
As the real estate industry changes, the board will continue to change. We've changed so much over the last 75 years that will just continue to keep changing and meeting the needs of the membership and the public when it comes to buying and selling property in the Mid-Missouri area.
Our level of professionalism is, I think, amazing. I'm so proud and feel honored because of the quality of the leadership that we have. I mean, people, I don't even know sometimes how wonderful we are, and then I will go somewhere else in the state and I think, wow, I am really lucky to be in Columbia.
And certainly we know that as the transaction continues to get more complex, that there will always be a need for a human, a professional realtor by the side of the consumer. And we are that great partner in the Mid-Missouri area for that.